Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of IDTALK for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, or the first time in a long time tuning in, I welcome you back, and I hope that today's episode is one that will keep you coming back for more. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of this podcast, as always, I hope that this episode is once again one that you will find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get to our main event, just a reminder for folks who are watching from YouTube, please hit that red subscribe button to get latest notifications on new episodes for the podcast. Also, if you're tuning in from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, make sure you subscribe there as well. And for those who would like to make donations monetarily to the podcast, there are two ways you can do that. The first way is to do a one-time donation, which can be done through these three platforms. So if you are on Cash App, you can use the handle $IDTALK4ED. If you're on Venmo, you can use the handle at Kwame SM. And if you are on PayPal, you can use the URL paypal.me/KwameSM to make direct donations there. Now, for those who have really benefited from this podcast and would love to invest in it at a higher level, consider becoming a patron. We have a whole Patreon community that provides patrons with exclusive content, more behind the scenes content that lets you know how we do work here in Identity Talk. And it's something that's going to give you a more intimate perspective on who I am, the work that I do. And it's only for you all. This is content that you're not going to see on any of my social media platforms. It is specifically for you. So if you want more of that exclusive content, join the Patreon community, and let's continue to build together. And then finally, my book, Learn to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culturally Affirming Classroom, is out on pre-order in both Amazon and Routledge. Make sure you all go get your copy. People have been asking me, Kwame, when is this book going to come out? As of right now, it's going to be coming out within the next 3 months. And I'm excited for it. And as we go closer to the release date, there'll be more opportunities for me to share with you all about what's in this wonderful book and how it came to be. But for right now, to learn more about it, you can go to the website, learningtorelearn.com, to learn more about the chapters as well as the resources that come with the book. All right, y'all. So I'm back to be recording again. I had to take a little more than a month off to spend time with family and do what I do. And I'm back to be here. So we have a new episode, and I'm excited to have this guest on because today we're going to be talking about a myriad of issues, including issues that are pertaining to the LGBTQ plus community in our international schools, but also the importance of understanding how the culture of whiteness has an impact on not only how we navigate society, but also how that informs the way that a lot of our international schools are operating in this current time. So to give us more of a informed perspective on how that works, I'd like to bring on Dr. Emily Meadows to the podcast to talk with us about all those issues, but also to talk about her life and her journey as an educator. So let's bring Dr. Emily on to talk with us. Hello.
Hi, Kwame. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you for accepting the invitation. So happy to see you. How you been?
Great. I, like you, took some time this summer to restore and refresh, and I'm excited to start this new school year.
There you go. I'm excited to be working with some different schools as well. I cannot wait. A lot of great things on the horizon. So before we get deep into the heart of the issue, I always like to start from the beginning. And you have a fascinating story that I believe everybody would love to hear, which is why you are here. So to start us off, I want to ask you, who or what inspired you to want to become an educator in the first place?
Well, if I'm very honest, I'm not sure I necessarily wanted to become an educator in the first place. I think I ended up in schools sort of on accident. I grew up in international schools, and that felt like my home as a child. And when we moved back to the United States, which is where me and my family are passport holders, I was shocked to realize I didn't actually feel like an American. And I didn't feel like I belonged in this country that I had been given a passport to. And so what I wanted, more than to become a teacher, was to get back into a place where I felt a sense of belonging. And so there were two main things that led me into education. One was literally just, I started studying French in undergrad because the last place I lived was France. And so I did I started working on a degree in French literature. And as soon as I could, I went back to France and I found a job teaching English. That was sort of all I could do without a degree. And it wasn't really the teaching that drew me, it was the being in France. But once I got there, once I got into the school, I realized it was a place where I could see potential for the other thing I really wanted, which was social justice.
Mm-hmm.
And social justice had been a thread throughout my life, an interest of mine. It felt like a personal interest for a really long time. And once I got into schools, I realized it could also align with my professional interests. So that's when I went back to school, graduate school, and said, okay, let me learn more about schools, about education, and how I can make a place for myself in this world and make a difference with students.
So you're talking about how when you were in the States, it didn't feel like home, even though that is where your passport is issued.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, I'm wondering how you define home personally, and what would you constitute as home?
Kwame, that is such a good question. For me, after really struggling to figure out where my home was and is, now I think of home not as a location, but as any place where I can show up as my whole self and feel safe to do so. That's it for me. That is home. That is actually a core concept to what I want to create in my work with schools. Our international schools, for a lot of families, they have left some version of home in another country. And so the school, for many, is the first opportunity to create another home, a new home. And what I want to do in my work as an LGBTQ consultant for these international schools is help these schools become a space where every single one of the community members who shows up there feels safe to bring their whole self, feels that this for them is a new home.
All right. And in thinking about home in the context of international schools, there are many times where, especially if you're a third culture kid, you're always trying to figure out what home is. You're always redefining it and reshaping it depending on the context you find yourself in, the country you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And with that comes struggles, whether they be internal or external. So in your journey through primary, secondary, K through 12, were there any of those struggles that you experienced as far as figuring out who you were and embracing that fully in those different spaces?
Are there any? There's how many? So many. I mean, beyond the nationality piece, which I've sort of touched on, I myself am queer. This is, part of why I do the work that I do. I am bi. I use both of those terms to talk about my experience. And when I was growing up, there was virtually no representation of queerness in any of my schools. I went to a lot of different schools in different countries, and lots of things were different in each of the schools, but that was a consistent, that there just wasn't any representation. The first time I remember having, not kids on the playground, but having a teacher actually mention something related to queerness in a classroom setting was in health class when we learned about HIV and AIDS. So it was some sort of representation, but it was really negative. It was really pathologizing. I didn't feel connected to that in any kind of way where I felt seen or safe in that space. So I think part of the struggle was just the loneliness of sort of navigating that day in, day out without feeling that there was room for it. A place where I spent a good part of my day every single day. And so this is, again, why I'm so interested in helping schools to find ways that are culturally relevant and positive to ensure that every student can see themselves when they show up on campus.
And I think now in this current stage, we have the language and we have the literature and the research to be able to articulate what's going on. But back then, like I had classmates who were definitely queer and we knew they were, but we didn't have the language to say, oh, this is who this person is. We just knew that they were different and they'd end up getting teased.
I didn't have the language to talk about myself. Like It wasn't even other people. I didn't have the language. When I was, sort of developing my sexual identity around those years, the representation that I saw, nothing at school. We didn't have social media. Okay, I'm that many years old. And what we had was TV and movies. I don't remember anything in movies. And what I remember from TV was Will and Grace and Ellen. And so it was, gay men or lesbian women. Bisexuality was not in my world. And it was a very, specific way of being. It was like almost a stereotypical kind of really, I don't know, now we would think of it as very mainstream way of existing. And so there was not, I didn't relate to either of those examples. They were also much older than me. They were adults and I was like a kid, a teenager. So I think it wasn't just you who didn't have words to talk about your peers. We didn't all necessarily have words to talk about ourselves. That's hard. That's hard to experience a feeling and to not be able to place what that is. It's very othering. It is part of the struggle. So we're doing better now. Yes, we're doing better now. And part of my work is to continue to push us forward so that kids don't have to worry about that. They can just be who they are.
And let's go there. So you consult with different international schools on different topics regarding LGBTQ plus community. And I'm wondering, in your consultations with the different schools, what are some of the areas that you've identified as areas of growth for those different schools? Whenever you go to them, what are some things that are recurring trends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I do work internationally. So literally everywhere on any continent where there is an international school. And so you do see a lot of variation in cultural context, but also just, school size or what the turnover looks like in the school, what the curriculum is. So there's a lot of variation. That said, there are also common themes that I see kind of worldwide. So one of the themes I see is that a lot of the educators I work with are incredible in their craft. They are experienced, they are committed. These are people who show up every day and work so hard for their kids, their students. And a lot of them call them experts in their field. And at the same time, what they tell me is they want to do right by their LGBTQ students, and they're just not sure how. They want to do the right thing, but very few of them got training on this in grad school. Even if they hold a PhD, this wasn't covered. So that is one theme, is people are saying, I need guidance on what the right thing is. Something else that I'm seeing is that it tends to be, in a lot of schools, you've got a few people who are doing this work in pockets or silos in their own practice, but it's not yet sort of integrated system-wide. And so what I love to do with schools is look at, yes, we want this happening in the small moments, of course, in the classroom, in the playground, and the cafeteria, and the soccer pitch. And we want this to be a broader system-wide approach to safety and belonging that you could see anywhere and everywhere in the school, and that it's embedded in the policies, in the practices, in the curriculum, in the hiring, in the admissions, that it's everywhere, so that it doesn't feel just that, you sort of have to, if you're a queer student, you don't have to cross your fingers and hope you get the teacher who is making space for you. So those are a couple of themes that I see throughout with my clients.
And another thing that I've noticed too is in a lot of countries, especially now, there's been this push for anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, which is nationwide in these different countries. And it's had an impact on international schools because it gets very political. It is political. So how does that response have an impact on how you approach your work with international schools?
So the first thing I always say, safety is my top priority. So, and I never want to put a child, certainly, or a teacher or a head of school in harm's way. So priority always is to ensure that what we're doing is safe. But I do work in lots of places where there is either sort of political rhetoric around anti-LGBTQ expectations, and sometimes there's legal restrictions where being LGBTQ is criminalized. And so what I don't want to do is say, well, throw up your hands and there's nothing that can be done. This place is doomed and your queer kids have no options. Like, that is not at all what we need to do. There are definitely ways that in any country in the world, literally any country in the world, we can make improvements for the LGBTQ students at the school. It will be different depending on where you are. It is tailored for each school, but I'll give you an example of sort of what we can look at. So if we move outside of the political and the legal and say, what is the responsibility of a school? I already said my top priority is always safety.
Right.
If we cannot keep kids safe, we have no business asking families to send us their most precious beings. So safety, top priority. And what we know, we now have a robust body of research going back decades. This is not new, showing that LGBTQ kids are at much higher risk of a number of negative outcomes, including depression, anxiety, even self-harm and suicidality. Also at higher risk of harassment and violence and harm from their peers. And so knowing that, it is really the responsibility of the school, maybe not to throw a pride parade, depending on where you are, could get a school shut down, but to say, look, we do not tolerate harassment, we do not tolerate bullying, we do not tolerate harm on the basis of actual or perceived gender or sexual identity. The nice thing about that too is, Kwame, a lot of kids get teased and bullied because of their gender presentation or their perceived sexual identity, even if they're straight. But we've kind of built socially this really narrow little box about what it means to be a guy, or what it means to be feminine. And anyone who doesn't fall really within that quite rigid box, which also does overlap with race, is a potential target for this kind of harassment. So when a school says, look, that doesn't fly here, we're actually protecting a lot more than just LGBTQ kids. And I think we can take that outside of the political and legal and just say, like, this is our job as a school. That's one approach, is really to just look at it through the lens of identity-based harm. And so that's something that I coach schools on, regardless of where they're located politically or legally.
So this season, IDTALK for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch. You don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at IDTALK4EDucators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at IDTALK4EDucators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. And I also think that the thing that makes international schools unique is that not only do you have expats who are teaching within the schools, but you also have staff members who are from the host country. And usually with those staff members, they were brought up in a different way culturally, where they didn't get that same exposure to homosexuality or the same exposure to what we were exposed to growing up. So I'm also curious to know how that learning curve is addressed.
It can be, although I want to clarify, I'm American. I didn't grow up in America, but I am American. And America is a pretty scary place to be queer right now, too. So I'm always careful. I mean, there are neighborhoods where it's wonderful to be queer, and there are lots of places where it's really risky. And so I'm always clear not to I don't judge or look down on certain areas of the world and saying, you're not with it, because I think anti-queerness is everywhere, and it just manifests in different ways in different places. So when I work with schools in host countries where the law is criminalizing of LGBTQ people, and that has been the context in which the local faculty and staff have been brought up, I see that as an opportunity to learn from the people on the ground who know more about that place than I do. I know a lot of things about LGBTQ safety and belonging in schools. I can talk about policy, I can talk about protocols, I can talk about best practice, curriculum. But when I walk into a school, almost everyone there knows that school better than me and can teach me something. So I use that as an opportunity to learn and to find common ground. And also to remember that anti-LGBTQ legislation originated in colonization from many of these places. And so it is not the local culture that has created an environment that is hostile to LGBTQ people. It is white colonizers who came in and stifled existing queerness and said, here's how we're going to do it from now on, sometimes at the risk of death or serious harm. And so, yes, you can quite quickly turn around a society's way of behaving with that kind of threat. And so getting back to what actually are the values here, a lot of times local values are about community, right? That aligns with LGBTQ belonging. Local values might be about safety, tends to be a big one, about education, about growth. Like, these are all things that align with the work that I do. So finding that overlap is always an interesting part, and certainly an area where I can learn from wisdom of people who are already there.
That's always essential, having the humility to say, I don't know it all, and decentering ourselves in a way that allows for folks who are in that context to provide that information from their funds of knowledge to allow us to grow our capacity. That's always essential, always. So I do want to give you a chance to talk about the Whiteness Accountability Group. And I know that it's happening this month, if not mistaken, in a couple weeks from this recording. So I want to give you a chance to talk about that, but also, how did the group get started?
Yes, so it's called the Whiteness Accountability Group for International Educators. We started in April 2021, so we're now going on 3+ years. It began through long walks and talks with my friend and co-facilitator, Tamara Friedman, who is an incredible human being, one of the best teachers I've ever met, and who is also committed to anti-racism as a white practitioner. And She is my in real life friend. So we spent lots of hours during COVID actually, and following the murder of George Floyd, walking, because being outside was something that was considered safer. We walked for hours and we would talk about these matters and what is our place as white people in the international school community. How can we contribute? Again, going back to what you just said, Kwame, decentering ourselves, but also not checking out and saying this isn't our fight. Mm-hmm. And so I benefit so much from Tamara and her wisdom. I really appreciated the opportunity to, bounce these ideas back and forth with her, not drawing on the emotional labor of our Black and Brown friends, but still digging into these topics. And it was through those conversations that we said, I bet there are other white people out there who could use a thought partner. Maybe we'll just open it up. And so we were terrified. We were kind of afraid people would show up and think we were a white supremacist group, or like we didn't know what was going to happen. We did contact folks like ALOC. We contacted ALOC and other people ahead of time and said, how does this feel for you? Making sure we're not stepping on anyone. Got lots of positive feedback. So we said, let's try it. Had our first Zoom meeting. We thought there would be like one person, and I don't remember. It was like 70 people showed up. And
wow.
We were like, okay. And so we've been meeting monthly ever since. It's a casual group. Folks can come as they have time, as their schedule allows. We encourage you, if it's at 10 p.m. your time, come in your pajamas. This is not a performance. We are here to work and to support one another and how we can really be effective as white people, as anti-racist allies and co-conspirators. And so our session that you mentioned coming up this month, it's on August 29th. Every summer, we do a book media study. So we take the month of July off and say, here are some recommended readings, podcasts, other types of media to engage with. When we come back on the 29th, we will have facilitators in different breakout rooms leading and facilitating discussions on the different pieces. So we have 3 different pieces, and you're recording your interview with Kanako Sua on being TCK is one of our selections for this year. So folks who are fans of yours should definitely re-listen if you haven't, or listen for the first time, and join us to talk about that. We also have a podcast supporting students to understand racial bias in AI. We've got a book, The Identity Conscious Educator by Eliza A. Talasan. So if anyone is welcome who's ready to do this work, no experience required, please join us, and we'd love to have you. So we can put the link in the notes, Kwame, for people who are interested in checking it out.
Yes, definitely. We will do that. And I have a question for you about allyship, because when this work really started to take off post George Floyd, there was a lot of talk about allyship. And then from there, we heard talk about, okay, now you got to be a co-conspirator, or now you have to be an abolitionist. And personally, I believe allyship is still important. But do you believe that there is a thin line between being an ally versus being a savior? Because it seems like there's some conflation between those two based on the different cases you see.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this was one of our big fears, right? Is that we were going to step into white savior territory. And it continues to be an area where we reflect back. And we actually have people who join our group who are not white. We have folks of color who occasionally come and sit in. I mean, it is not closed to people. We say, this is what we're going to be doing. If you want to join us, please do. And so we really, without wanting to put the burden of sort of checking on us on folks of color, if someone shows up, we're always happy to hear that input and that feedback, because it is tricky. And we were deliberate in saying we don't want to cross that line, and also saying that fear probably stops people from getting engaged at all. And we don't want to be those people either, right? The people who say, if we can't do it perfectly, then we're not doing it at all. So the way that we hold ourselves accountable is to always be open to any sort of input from folks of color, but also to continue learning. So we don't consider ourselves experts. We are facilitators of a space. And so we attend things like you and I met in person at the ALOC conference in Hanoi this past year, where I traveled there to be part of that conference and to learn from the incredible wisdom of folks of color who are doing this work. It's a constantly ongoing process. I think there's definitely a chance I will mess up at some point, or already have. And
we all will.
I invite you and any of your listeners to hold my feet to the fire and help me keep doing better.
Right. And I think that's the case for all of us. And it's part of the reason why I believe my podcast has shifted in recent years, because I saw it as an opportunity to be a student, to bring on people who have subject matter expertise and have first-person experience on these different issues. Even in doing my research for this book, Learning to Relearn, I knew I had to talk about heteronormativity. I knew I had to talk about how that plays a role in how schools operate. I know I need to bring on people who can speak on things such as LGBTQ plus history, and even something as nuanced as pronoun usage. Because even with your good intentions, you want to give people free agency to use the pronouns that they best identify with, but at the same time, it serves as safety when they don't come out. So understanding the context that you're in and not trying to force the issue, just kind of reading the room. So just those nuanced things that you're not able to pick up on that other people can talk about. It's important to have the conversations and learn from people. And it's something that I've had to do over the past few years. There was a time where I couldn't tell you that, okay, I'm a cis, hetero, Black, able-bodied male who has privileges in these areas. Even though I am Black and I face marginalization in that area, I know where my privileges lie. So understanding how power and positionality and privilege work depend on the context I'm in, I had to learn that. People had to call me in to teach me that. So what you're saying is not unique to a lot of people's experiences, especially those who are doing this work.
Completely agree. And also, just to clarify, this is a practice that I engage in because I think it's important, but I separate it from my professional work. So I do not consider myself an anti-racism professional or expert. I never accept money for this work. We have facilitated courses on whiteness accountability, but anytime it's paid, the money has been donated to ALOC. So we never take money, and we do not position ourselves as experts. We're always referring out. In fact, there is a great list of anti-racism professionals of color who do this work professionally and who you should hire if you want someone to do this for you at your school. And we are never instead of, only in addition to and in support of that type of work. So that's another sort of way to sort of try to maintain that line so we're not crossing into any sort of white saviorism.
So let me ask you this, Emily. So circling back to your upbringing and how as a kid you were living in different countries and you're being exposed to people from different walks of life, do you believe that if you had lived in the States your whole life and you kind of had a similar upbringing to what I had as far as just being in the States and not traveling a lot, do you believe that you'd be a different person and you wouldn't be doing the work that you're doing now? Because I do believe that it has informed in many ways a lot of the work that you're doing.
That is a wide open question. I can certainly say that I would not be doing it in the way that I'm doing it, because I specifically work with international schools and related organizations. And the reason is because those are the schools I know. So I know that context so well that when someone says to me, oh, no, we can't do that here, it's too hard because XYZ, I can say, this is actually like, I know this area, let me show you how we can. I get calls from local schools in the United States asking me to come do work with them. And I say, no, you need someone who knows your context really well. And that's not me, someone who really gets you. And so I'm sure I'd be doing it differently if I hadn't grown up in international schools. But that's why I specialize in and really just focus on international school context.
It makes sense. And for those who have never worked or have attended international school, it's different. It's very different from being in a regular K-12 school in the States. Different issues, even though there is some intersection in some areas, it's very different, as I've experienced in my time abroad. But I want to go ahead and start wrapping things up and talk about where you are right now, just personally, because with the work that you're doing, there is heavy lifting. And in ways, it's selfless, it's emotionally taxing, it's physically taxing, because you are doing a work that requires a collective of people. Like, you can't do this by yourself. So in thinking about where you are in this stage of life, how do you feel? Are you at peace with who you are? And are there any things that you're still exploring about yourself?
At this stage in my life, I'm full of gratitude for what I have and what I get to do. While this work is heavy, I never could have dreamed that I would be able to do it professionally, and really that I feel that my work has meaning. And when I walk into a GSA, a Gender Sexualities Alliance, with queer students in a school, and I get to meet with them and hear their stories and get feedback from them about what it means to have a queer person talking at their school, I feel utterly grateful and a deep sense of responsibility to do this right and to do this well. And so I am constantly exploring myself and how I can do this work better. I mean, I think, your podcast is Identity Talk. What is more interesting than identity, self and others? I love hearing about other people's stories, constantly examining my own. And I think this is the kind of work that's never ending. It's lifelong, and it's rich and it's meaningful. And I think the last thing is that what I appreciate about having found myself in this field is that I get to connect with other people who are curious and interested in identities. I get to talk to people like you and your long list of incredible guests who you've got, like some rock stars on here in your feed. And I feel so lucky to call many of them also my friends and colleagues. This is the stuff that life is made of. And I'm really grateful to be in community with you, Kwame.
And just to let you know, Emily, you're a rock star too.
Thank you.
Don't shortchange yourself. There's a reason why you are here. I admire your work so much, and I'm happy that we finally had a chance to really do a deep dive into why you do it and how you go about doing it. But before I let you go, this is the question I ask all my guests. How does Dr. Emily Meadows stay true to the teacher in her?
I stay true to the teacher in me by centering the students who I'm working for. All I need to do, I've got a number of LGBTQ kids who I've met over the years. All I need to do is call to mind one of their stories, and that keeps me true. With all of the rhetoric, Kwame, we've talked about, there are a lot of people who do not want me doing what I'm doing. There are a lot of, there are a lot of people who also want me to tone down my message, or there are a lot of people who would like me to stop. And I stay true to the teacher in me by thinking of those students. That's all I need.
There it is, y'all. There it is. Emily, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. And please let people know, number one, how they can connect with you on social media, but also you can provide more information about your services and the Whiteness Accountability Group.
Sure. So I am still on Twitter for now. I don't know, y'all. To be To be decided if how long that goes on. But I'm on LinkedIn. I sort of have been switching over to LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn. I also have a website, emilymeadows.org. You can reach me, find out more about my services. When I work with schools, I do training for faculty, staff, different groups. I do policy development, and I'll do case consultation. If you've got something that's come up and you're just not quite sure how to manage it, whether it's with sports or pronouns or the health office or anything like that, I'm happy to consult on it. Yeah, so please do stay in touch. And the whiteness accountability, I'll have to give you a link. We don't have a webpage. So I'll give you a link for how to find us and stay on our mailing list to get updates. And please do join.
And we'll put all the information in the episode notes. So don't worry, y'all. You will get the information. Just stay connected. Thank you, Emily. And I'm wishing you a successful school year, a restful one, a peaceful one. That's all I got.
Thank you, Kwame. I appreciate you so much.
All right. Take care. All right, people. So we are about to end another episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, people.